The 1950s were supposed to be the golden age of American car design. Chrome everywhere, bold fins, and dreams of a futuristic tomorrow. But for every beautiful masterpiece that rolled out of Detroit, there were a few head-scratchers that made people wonder. What were they thinking? Today, we're diving into some of the most misguided machines of the decade. You might not recognize these names, but trust me, their stories will make you glad they stayed forgotten. 1950 Crosley Hotshot Supersport. In an era obsessed with bigger, flashier, and more powerful cars, the Crosley Hotshot Supersport was a head-scratcher. Built by the tiny Crosley Motors Company, it was America's first post-war sports car. At least that's what the ads claimed. In reality, it was more like a go-kart with license plates. Under the hood was a 26.5 horsepower four-cylinder engine. Yes, you heard that right. Less power than some modern riding lawnmowers. The Hotshot could technically reach highway speeds, eventually. Drivers had to floor it and pray the road was flat, because climbing hills felt like dragging a piano up a staircase. Its lightweight aluminum body kept it nimble, but also made it feel tinny and unsafe compared to the massive steel cruisers Americans loved. The Spartan interior looked more like a stripped-down racing shell than a comfortable ride, and for a car marketed as sporty, it lacked the punch to match its own hype. While Crosley enthusiasts appreciated its charm, most buyers didn't want to spend their hard-earned dollars on a car that could be outrun by the family station wagon. By 1952, the Hotshot sputtered out, leaving behind a lesson. Style and ambition mean nothing if the engine can't back it up. 1950 Kaiser Henry J. When Kaiser Frazer introduced the Henry J, the idea was simple: give Americans a compact, affordable car during the post-war boom. Unfortunately, the execution made it one of the oddest and most impractical vehicles of the decade. For starters, it had no trunk lid. If you wanted to put luggage in the back, you had to reach through the rear seats. This bizarre design choice saved money during production, but instantly frustrated buyers. The interior was cramped, the build felt cheap, and the styling was, let's just say, unique. It looked like someone had taken a regular sedan and shrunk it in the wash. Power came from a small four-cylinder engine that struggled to keep up with traffic. Kaiser offered a 6-cylinder option, but it still wasn't enough to make the car feel lively. The Henry J's plain looks and sluggish performance made it a tough sell, especially when slightly more money could get you a full-sized Chevrolet or Ford with far more comfort and style. Even worse, its bare-bones approach made it feel outdated right from launch. Buyers in the 1950s wanted chrome, fins, and flair, not budget-friendly blandness. Kaiser hoped the Henry J would be the people's car, but instead, it became a rolling example of how cutting costs can cut your success short. 1952 Hudson Wasp. Hudson had made a name for itself with the sleek, low-slung Hornet, a racing legend that dominated NASCAR. So, when the Wasp arrived in 1952, people expected a sportier, more affordable cousin to the Hornet. Instead, they got a car that felt like the Hornet's awkward little brother. The Wasp borrowed Hudson's step-down design, which gave it a lower center of gravity for better handling. But under the hood, it packed a modest 6-cylinder engine that lacked the thrill buyers expected. Styling was uninspired, almost as if Hudson had taken last year's design, removed a few chrome bits, and called it a day. The interior was roomy enough, but it lacked the upscale touches that could justify its price. Worse, the Wasp was heavier than many competitors, making its already modest power feel even weaker. Driving it felt more like cruising in a budget family car than piloting a performance-inspired machine. In a decade where car design was becoming bolder every year, the Wasp simply didn't stand out. It wasn't terrible, just forgettable. And in the car business, forgettable is a death sentence. By mid-decade, the Wasp was gone, remembered only as the car that proved Hudson couldn't ride the Hornet's reputation forever. 1953 Packard Clipper. The Packard name once stood for true American luxury, but by the early 1950s, the brand was struggling, and the Clipper was supposed to be its comeback. Instead, it became a symbol of Packard's slow decline. The 1953 Clipper wasn't a bad car mechanically, it was just hopelessly bland. In an age of tail fins and daring colors, the Clipper's conservative styling made it look like it belonged in the late 1940s. It didn't help that the interior design felt dated, with little to excite younger buyers who were flocking to flashier brands. Packard offered both straight-8 and V8 engines, but neither gave the Clipper a performance edge over competitors. It was smooth and quiet, but so was nearly every other sedan in its class. Meanwhile, Cadillac and Lincoln were rolling out cars that made the Clipper look like yesterday's news. The biggest problem? The Clipper lacked a clear identity. It wasn't sporty, it wasn't cutting edge, and it wasn't luxurious enough to compete at the top. It was just there. And in the cutthroat car market of the 1950s, just there meant soon gone. 1954 Nash Metropolitan. If you think Americans loved small cars in the 1950s, think again. The Nash Metropolitan was built in England, imported to the US, and marketed as a second car for suburban families, but it turned out to be a tough sell in a land obsessed with size and power. At just 149 inches long, the Metropolitan was tiny compared to the average American sedan. It looked like a toy next to the chrome giants of the day. Under the hood, a small four-cylinder engine gave it decent fuel economy, but performance was sluggish. Reaching highway speeds was possible, but not exactly effortless. Inside, it was surprisingly comfortable for 2 passengers, but forget about fitting more people or much luggage. Its cute styling drew attention, but many drivers felt self-conscious piloting something so small in an era that equated bigger with better. The Metropolitan found a niche among urban drivers and those who wanted something different, but it never came close to mainstream success. By 1962, it was gone from U.S. showrooms, remembered mostly as the little car that dared to be different, but couldn't convince most Americans to downsize. Dodge La Femme. In the mid-1950s, Dodge decided it was time to create a car specifically for women. Their answer, the La Femme, a two-tone pink and white Dodge Custom Royal Lancer with matching interior accessories, including a purse, compact, lipstick case, and even a raincoat. It sounds like a marketing dream from the era, but in practice, it was a cringe-worthy gimmick. Dodge assumed women only cared about fashion and color coordination, completely ignoring performance and practicality. The La Femme was mechanically identical to the regular Lancer, offering nothing unique under the hood, just the same V8 and automatic transmission. The interior's exclusive accessories were nice touches for a weekend drive, but hardly a reason to buy a car, and the pink and white paint job, while eye-catching, made it impossible for buyers to blend in. Dodge thought they were empowering women. Instead, they came across as patronizing. The biggest flaw was that the La Femme wasn't marketed as a capable car. It was marketed as a novelty. Women who wanted performance or utility had plenty of other options without the pink trim and purse. Sales were dismal, and the La Femme quietly vanished after just 2 years. Today, it's remembered as a rare collectible, but also as a rolling example of how not to market to half the population. 1955 Chevrolet Cameo Carrier. Chevrolet's Cameo Carrier was billed as the future of the pickup, a stylish blend of car-like looks with truck utility. On paper, it was brilliant. In reality, it left truck buyers wondering why anyone would pay more for a less useful pickup. The Cameo ditched the typical rugged steel bed for smooth fiberglass panels that gave it a sleek, two-tone appearance. It looked fantastic in showrooms, especially alongside Chevrolet's full-size sedans. But the fancy finish scratched and dented easily, making it impractical for anyone who actually used their truck for work. Payload capacity wasn't much better than a standard half-ton, and the Cameo cost more than comparable work trucks. Farmers, contractors, and tradesmen weren't lining up to pay extra for a pickup they had to baby. Chevrolet was trying to invent the lifestyle truck decades before it became popular, but the market just wasn't ready. Only around 10,000 Cameos were built over 4 years, and by the end of the decade, Chevy reverted to more traditional truck styling. The Cameo proved that style sells, but not if it gets in the way of doing the job. 1956 Studebaker Golden Hawk. When Studebaker rolled out the Golden Hawk, they wanted to make a statement, a luxury coupe with serious muscle. They even dropped a supercharged V8 into later models, making it one of the fastest American cars of its time in a straight line. So what went wrong? Handling. Lots of it, or rather, the lack of it. The Golden Hawk's heavy nose and soft suspension made cornering a nerve-wracking experience. The car had a habit of leaning dramatically in turns, and its drum brakes struggled to rein in all that speed. It could outrun a Corvette in a drag race, but on a winding road, it felt like steering a speedboat through rapids. Styling was another mixed bag. Some loved its bold grille and sweeping lines, while others thought it looked like three different cars welded together. Inside, it had the plushness you'd expect from a near-luxury brand, but also the squeaks and rattles of a smaller manufacturer struggling to keep up with Detroit's big players. The Golden Hawk developed a small cult following, but it was never a big seller. It remains a classic case of a car that had the heart of a sports car, but the body and manners of a heavyweight cruiser. 1956, Hudson Hornet Hollywood. Once a NASCAR legend, the Hudson Hornet had lost its edge by the time the Hollywood Coupe version rolled out. The step-down design was still there, giving the car a low, sleek profile, but under the skin, things weren't looking so good. By 1956, Hudson had been merged into American Motors, and the Hollywood was little more than a badge-engineered version of the Nash Ambassador. That meant the distinctive Hudson character was gone, replaced by a generic mid-50s look. Performance was fine for a daily driver, but nothing special. The Hornet's once feared inline-six felt outdated, and optional V8s were better but still behind the competition. The Hollywood name promised glamour, but the car didn't deliver. Styling was awkward, with bulky proportions and minimal flair. The interior was roomy and comfortable, but not luxurious enough to stand out in a market overflowing with chrome and style. Longtime Hudson fans felt betrayed, and new buyers had little reason to choose the Hollywood over flashier, faster rivals. By the end of the decade, the Hornet name was shelved, leaving the Hollywood as a bittersweet reminder of a brand that had once been on top of the racing world. 1957 Plymouth Plaza. The Plymouth Plaza was supposed to be the no-frills, affordable choice for budget-conscious buyers, and it was, but it was also so bare bones that even people on a budget thought twice. On the outside, the Plaza looked like a stripped-down version of Plymouth's flashier models, with minimal chrome and plain trim. Inside, things were even more basic. Vinyl bench seats, sparse dash details, and few comfort options gave the Plaza all the charm of a taxicab. Under the hood, a modest six-cylinder engine got the job done, but getting the job done is about the nicest thing you could say. Acceleration was slow, and the ride was firm enough to make long trips feel longer. Plymouth offered V8 upgrades, but most Plaza buyers stuck with the cheapest configuration, which didn't do much for the car's image. The problem wasn't that the Plaza was unreliable. It was that it was uninspiring. In a decade where cars were getting more stylish and better equipped every year, the Plaza looked and felt like it had given up before it even left the factory. It sold to fleets and frugal buyers, but few people bought one because they wanted it. 1957 Mercury Turnpike Cruiser. If any car screamed 1950s excess, it was the Mercury Turnpike Cruiser. Named after America's new high-speed highways, it was supposed to be the ultimate long-distance cruiser. Instead, it became a showcase of gimmicks that looked cool in ads but didn't do much in the real world. The Turnpike Cruiser's most talked-about feature was its breezeway rear window, a retractable glass panel that rolled down for ventilation. It was neat, but also let in rain, dust, and exhaust fumes if you weren't careful. The car also had a roof-mounted air intake, futuristic push-button controls, and enough chrome to blind oncoming drivers. Under the hood, the big V8 provided solid power, but the car's size and weight made it more of a gas-guzzling boulevard cruiser than a high-speed highway star. Handling was boat-like, and parking the thing required both skill and luck. Buyers loved the flash at first, but the novelty wore off quickly when the quirks started to show. Sales lagged, and Mercury eventually ditched the cruiser's more eccentric features. Today, the Turnpike Cruiser is remembered as a bold experiment that proved sometimes more isn't better, it's just more. 1958 Packard Hawk. By 1958, the once prestigious Packard brand was in freefall, and the Hawk was its last attempt at staying relevant. Built by Studebaker Packard, it was essentially a rebadged Studebaker Golden Hawk with some cosmetic changes, and not for the better. The Hawk's most polarizing feature was its nose, a fiberglass front end with a wide, gaping grille that looked like it was trying to swallow the road. The rest of the body was standard Golden Hawk, meaning it still had the heavy front front end and less than ideal handling that plagued its sibling. Inside, it offered plush seating and upscale trim, but the dated dashboard and awkward ergonomics reminded buyers this was more parts bin project than luxury coupe. The supercharged V8 gave it strong acceleration, but it still couldn't compete with the refinement of Cadillac or Chrysler's 300 series. Worse, Packard's reputation was already damaged, and buyers weren't lining up to spend big on a brand they suspected wouldn't be around much longer. They were right. 1958 was the last year for Packard-branded cars. The Hawk ended up being a flashy but desperate send-off, more eulogy than comeback. Buick Century Caballero estate wagon. In the 1950s, station wagons were family haulers, but Buick decided the Caballero estate wagon should also be a style statement. The result was one of the most over-the-top wagons of the decade and one of the least practical. The Caballero's sweeping lines, four-door hardtop design, and massive chrome trim made it stand out, but its size and weight hurt performance, and fuel economy was predictably awful. The big V8 had power, but it was working hard to move all that bulk. Then, there was the tailgate problem. Buick's fancy two-piece tailgate looked great, but was notorious for misalignment and rattles, especially after a few thousand miles. Owners complained about constant adjustments and squeaks that no amount of grease could fix. Inside, it was pure Buick luxury with plush seats and lots of gadgets, but all that comfort came at a high price, making it more expensive than many rivals. For families who actually used their wagons for work or travel, the Caballero's beauty didn't outweigh its quirks. Buick dropped it after just 2 years, proving even wagons can fall victim to style over substance thinking. 1959 Rambler Rebel Custom. The Rambler Rebel Custom tried to pull off a rare trick, combine the fuel economy and practicality of a compact with the speed and flair of a performance car. Unfortunately, it ended up stuck somewhere in the middle. The Rebel's compact size and lightweight body gave it good maneuverability, and the available V8 delivered respectable acceleration, but the suspension tuning and overall refinement just weren't there. It felt twitchy at high speeds and rough over bumps, making long drives tiring. Styling was another compromise. It was sharper than Rambler's economy models, but still too plain to stand out in a decade obsessed with drama and chrome. Inside, it offered more space than expected, but cost-cutting showed in the materials and fit and finish. Rambler marketed it as a do-it-all car, but buyers weren't convinced. Performance enthusiasts thought it was too soft, while economy-focused drivers didn't want the added cost of the V8. Sales were modest, and the Rebel faded quickly, remembered as a car that proved sometimes meeting in the middle means pleasing no one. 1959 Chrysler Imperial Crown. If there was ever a car that summed up the wild excess of late 1950s American luxury, the Chrysler Imperial Crown was it. Long, wide, and dripping in chrome, it was designed to outshine Cadillac and Lincoln at all costs, and it did, for all the wrong reasons. The most controversial feature? The freestanding headlights perched on chrome pods, making the front look like something out of a sci-fi movie. The tail fins were enormous, the grille was massive, and the overall effect was more spaceship than sedan. Underneath the spectacle was a big, smooth V8 that delivered strong performance, but the car's sheer size made it a challenge to park or maneuver. Fuel economy was laughable, even for the time. Inside, it was packed with gadgets, including push-button transmission controls and elaborate power accessories, many of which were finicky and expensive to repair. Chrysler wanted the Imperial to scream wealth and power. It did, but it also screamed overdone. Buyers who wanted flash loved it, but others found it gaudy and impractical. The Imperial Crown remains a symbol of a time when American automakers believed there was no such thing as too much. The 1950s gave us some of the most iconic cars in history, but also some of the strangest, most overhyped, and downright baffling machines ever to hit the road. Each of these stupidest cars tells a story of big dreams, bold risks, and the sometimes painful gap between concept and reality. Which one do you think was the biggest flop of them all? Drop your pick in the comments, hit subscribe, and keep exploring the forgotten corners of automotive history, because the weird ones are often the most fun to remember.